She waited 3 hours for a man who was never coming. And when the most dangerous man in Chicago finally sat down across from her, she didn't beg. She didn't run. She looked him dead in the eye and told him the truth. What happened next turned one blind date into the most wanted woman in the city. If you're watching this right now, drop a like and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The reservation had been made for 7 o'clock. By 7:45, Delilah Mercer had already told herself 3 separate lies. The first lie was that the traffic on the I-90 was brutal on Friday nights, and Ethan was probably stuck somewhere near the Irving Park exit, white-knuckling his steering wheel and already typing out an apology on his phone. The second lie was that successful software entrepreneurs were notoriously bad with time. She had read that somewhere, she was almost sure of it, something about creative people and their loose relationship with schedules. The third lie, and the worst one, was that this wasn't humiliating. It was absolutely humiliating. Delilah sat at table 14 inside Aurelius, which was the kind of restaurant that didn't have prices on the menu and expected you to already know what everything cost. The chairs were ivory and gold and impractical. The chandeliers above her head were so heavily crystalled they looked like frozen waterfalls, and the light they threw down onto the white tablecloths was the particular shade of gold that made thin women look luminous and made Delilah feel like she was sitting under a spotlight she hadn't auditioned for. She was wearing the green dress. She had almost not worn the green dress. She had stood in front of her bathroom mirror for 11 minutes. She had counted, because she was the kind of woman who noticed things like that, holding the green dress in one hand and a safe black blazer and slacks combination in the other. The green dress was emerald, deep cut at the neckline, and it fit her body exactly the way it was supposed to fit a body like hers, which was to say it didn't try to hide anything. It announced her. She had bought it 8 months ago and had not worn it once. She had put on the green dress. She had told herself she deserved to wear the green dress. Now she sat in it at a table for 2 inside the most expensive restaurant in Chicago, watching the empty chair across from her collect minutes like debt. And she was using every ounce of discipline she had built over 34 years of being underestimated to keep her face completely, utterly still. The waiter, a young man with a French name she'd already forgotten, had come by 4 times. The first time she had ordered sparkling water. The second time she had ordered a glass of the Montrachet because she figured if she was going to sit here, she was going to sit here properly. The third time she had told him her guest was running late, and no, she didn't need to see the menu just yet. The fourth time, 10 minutes ago, she had felt the particular quality of his sympathy in the slight downward angle of his chin, and she had ordered another glass of wine before he could offer it to her out of pity. She was a financial analyst. She worked for Callaway and Briggs, a mid-sized firm in the Loop that managed portfolios for people who had enough money to be paranoid about it. She was good at her job. She was, in fact, exceptional at her job, which was something her supervisors acknowledged in private and overlooked in public. She spent her days reading numbers the way other people read faces, finding the story underneath the surface data, the place where the math started lying. She noticed things. It was both her best quality and the one that had made her loneliest, because she had learned early that most people didn't want to be noticed that closely. Ethan Cross had called her perceptive. He had said it like it was something rare. They had met online, which she didn't advertise, not because she was ashamed of it, but because she was tired of the particular brand of cheerful encouragement people offered when she told them. The slight widening of the eyes, the careful brightness of the smile, the way they said, "Good for you," the way you said it to someone learning to walk again. They had exchanged messages for 3 weeks. He was funny in the specific way that felt spontaneous, but was probably calculated, and she had noticed that but had decided not to penalize him for it, because everyone performed a version of themselves at the beginning. He had a profile photo that was just attractive enough to be plausible, and when they had finally moved from the app to actual phone calls, his voice had the warmth of someone who had practiced warmth until it came naturally. He had told her she was intimidating. She had laughed. He had said he meant it as a compliment. She had believed him. Now it was 8:53, and she had not heard from him in 2 hours and 16 minutes, and the last message she had sent, a carefully neutral, still on, that she had rewritten 4 times, sat in her phone with a single gray check mark, which meant it had not been delivered, which meant his phone was either off or she had been blocked. She set her phone face down on the tablecloth. She looked up at the chandelier. She thought about the commute home. The red line, probably. She had driven herself here, actually, which meant the 2 glasses of Montrachet were going to demand she sit somewhere and drink water for an hour before she was fit to drive. She could do that at the bar, or she could call a car and come back for hers tomorrow. Either way, it was fine. It was completely fine. And in the morning, she was going to wake up in her apartment and make coffee. And this was going to be a bad night she would not think about again. She reached for her purse, and then the room changed. It was not a dramatic change. It was not something she could have pointed to and described precisely, except that the air pressure inside Aurelius shifted, the way it does before a storm when something in the atmosphere draws tight. The conversation at the table to her left, 3 men in suits arguing quietly about a Blackhawks trade, stopped mid-sentence. The piano in the far corner, which had been playing something soft and forgettable, fell silent. Not because the song ended, because the pianist simply stopped playing. The front doors opened. She heard them before she felt them. The particular percussion of heavy wood against a frame that didn't want to give, and then the cold off the lake pouring in like a held breath finally released. The candles on the nearby tables bent sideways and recovered. She turned, because the whole room turned. The whole room went toward those doors the way iron filings go toward a magnet, and that involuntary movement told her everything she needed to know about what had just walked in before she even saw him. Roman Viscari was not the tallest man in the room. He was not the broadest. He was somewhere around 6'1", built the way men get built when they spend time doing things that actually require strength rather than things that merely display it. And he was wearing a dark coat over a darker suit, and he moved through the entrance of Aurelius with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who had never once in his adult life needed to hurry because the world waited for him. She had heard his name. Everyone in Chicago had heard his name, the same way everyone had heard about the cold front coming in off the lake, had heard the numbers on what this winter was going to cost the city. It was the kind of information that circulated not because anyone sought it out, but because the atmosphere carried it. Roman Viscari. The Viscari organization. She had read about it the way she read about earthquakes in regions she didn't live in, with the distant awareness of a person who understood that some forces of nature simply operated on a different scale than daily life. He was 40, maybe 42, with dark hair gone silver at the temples, and a face that was composed in the way faces got composed when they had been held still through things that would have cracked other faces open. He had a cut along his jaw, fresh, barely scabbed, and he hadn't bothered to cover it. His eyes moved across the room in one long pass, organized and unhesitating, the way she moved across a spreadsheet looking for the number that didn't belong. They stopped on her. She didn't look away. She would think about that later. She would think about the fact that every other person in Aurelius, from the waitstaff to the hostess to the 3 men who'd been arguing about hockey, had found something intensely interesting to look at on the floor or the tablecloth or their own hands. And she had not. She had sat there in her green dress with her empty wine glass, and her face gone completely still, and she had looked directly at Roman Viscari, because in that moment looking away felt like an admission of something she hadn't done. He walked toward her, she thought. He's going to walk past my table. He's going to someone behind me. He's meeting someone here, some associate, some contact, and table 14 just happens to be in his sightline, and she was reading this entirely wrong. He pulled out the empty chair across from her. He sat down. He placed both hands flat on the table. His knuckles were scarred in the irregular way that came from impact rather than surgery. He looked at her the way you look at something you are trying to determine the weight of. "Where is Ethan Cross?" His voice was low and even, and had no performance in it whatsoever. It was the voice of a man asking a question he already knew the shape of, who just needed one more piece of data to complete the picture. Delilah felt the bottom of the evening drop out. "I'm sorry?" Ethan Cross. He didn't repeat it louder. He didn't need to. "You've been sitting at his reservation for 2 hours and 53 minutes. I want to know where he is." His reservation. Her voice was completely level. She was proud of that later, the levelness of her voice in that specific moment. He made this reservation. Something moved through Roman Viscari's expression. Not softness. More like a recalibration. The fractional adjustment of a man who was getting an answer he hadn't predicted and was deciding what to do with it. "Yes. Then you know more than I do," Delilah said, "because I've been sitting here for 3 hours waiting for him, and I have not seen him. and he is not returning my messages. So, she picked up her empty wine glass and set it back down because there was nothing in it, and she needed something to do with her hands. I would genuinely like to know where he is as well. The silence between them was long enough to be deliberate. One of Roman's men, she only now registered that there were men, 3 of them, standing at positions around the room that she retroactively understood were not coincidences, shifted his weight near the front doors. You didn't know him before the app. It wasn't a question. She answered it anyway. 3 weeks of messages, 4 phone calls. This was supposed to be our first in-person meeting. She looked at him steadily. Which would make me the person in this room who knows him least. Including you, apparently. Something happened in his eyes. Not warmth exactly, more like interest, the specific kind that carried danger in it. You're not afraid, he said. I'm in a restaurant, she said. There are 47 other people here, the kitchen staff alone. There are 31 people in this room, Roman said. 2 of them are mine, and 1 is off-duty CPD who clocked me when I walked in and is currently deciding whether to make a career-ending mistake. You are not safe because of the numbers. You're just not afraid. She opened her mouth, closed it. That's either very stupid, he said, or you actually have nothing to hide. I have nothing to hide. She heard her own voice, raw-edged and tired. The politeness stripped out of it, the way paint stripped off a wall in the cold. I put on a dress, and I came to dinner, and I have been sitting in this chair for 3 hours being humiliated by a man who apparently has a much more complicated life than his dating profile suggested, and I would like to go home. She stood up. He didn't move. 2 of his men, without appearing to move closer, were somehow closer. Sit down, Ms. Mercer. She stared at him. How do you know my name? Ethan Cross made this reservation in your name. The hostess confirmed it 40 minutes ago when my people called ahead. He looked at her chair with an expression that was not quite an invitation and not quite a command, but lived in the dangerous space between them. Sit down. This will take less time than you think. Delilah sat down. Not because she was afraid. She told herself that, and in the particular way of true things, she almost believed it. She sat down because something in the logical architecture of the evening had just shifted, and she needed to understand the new shape of it, because she was the kind of person who needed to understand things. And Roman Viscari was, whatever else he was, clearly the person in the room with the most information. The waiter appeared from somewhere, blanched visibly, and disappeared again. Roman leaned forward slightly, not enough to be threatening, just enough to lower the radius of the conversation to something private. Ethan Cross has worked inside my organization for 4 years, he said. He managed accounts. Specifically, the accounts that do not appear in any public filing and are not discussed in any venue that has windows. He paused. 48 hours ago, he accessed a financial database he was not authorized to access, extracted information worth considerably more than his life, transferred $7.4 million across 11 accounts in 4 countries, and disappeared. Delilah listened. Her face did not move. Before he disappeared, Roman continued, he set up this date. With you. He selected this restaurant, this table, this time. He made the reservation in your name and sent you instructions to arrive at 7. He watched her carefully. He also sent you a file. The file. Her stomach went cold. 3 days ago. 4? Ethan had sent her a message through the app while they'd still been using it. Hey, I know this is a little unusual, but can you download this? It's the menu from Aurelius that they have a curated tasting experience and they send it as a PDF, but their website is terrible and the link doesn't work right on mobile. Just save it to your phone and you can look it over before we meet. I already picked a couple things I think you'll love. She had downloaded it. She had never opened it. She had forgotten about it entirely until this moment, sitting across from a man whose men were blocking the exits of a restaurant that had gone so quiet she could hear the ice shift in someone's water glass 3 tables over. There was a file, she said. Roman's expression didn't change, but his stillness changed, the quality of it deepening by a fraction that she caught only because she was watching for it. What kind of file? He said it was a menu. The cold in her stomach had spread. He said the restaurant sent their tasting menu as a PDF and the website link didn't work on mobile. She looked down at her purse. I downloaded it. I didn't open it. I forgot it was there. She watched Roman Viscari make a series of very rapid calculations behind his eyes. Take out your phone, he said. Ms. Mercer. His voice was still quiet, still even. I need you to take out your phone. She took out her phone, opened her downloads folder, found the file, Aurelius_menu_tasting_fall.pdf, downloaded 4 days ago, file size 847 megabytes, which was, she now registered with the particular sick clarity of a person who read data for a living, not a file size that any menu in the history of menus had ever been. She turned the screen toward him. He looked at it. He sat back. For the first time since he'd walked into Aurelius, Roman Vescari closed his eyes, just briefly, just long enough to be a tell, and when he opened them, the expression on his face was one she would spend a long time afterward trying to name. It was not anger, though anger was probably there somewhere underneath it. It was something colder, the specific look of a man who has just understood the full architecture of a problem and does not yet know all the ways it is going to cost him. He encrypted it, Roman said quietly. Not to her. To himself or to the air or to wherever his thoughts went when they got very serious. He encrypted the entire database, compressed it, disguised the header, and sent it to a woman he'd never met, knowing my people would find her first. He was very still. He used you as a dead drop. A what? Information storage. A place to hide something. Except you're not a place. You're a person. He looked at her again. Which means you've been carrying the financial architecture of my entire operation inside your phone for the past 4 days, and you didn't know it existed. The silence in Aurelius had achieved a texture by now. It was not the comfortable silence of an upscale restaurant at peak hours. It was the silence of a room full of people trying very hard not to hear a conversation they were absolutely hearing. You thought I was working with him, Delilah said. I considered it. You don't anymore. No. He said it simply. Nobody acts that angry on cue, and nobody who was in on this would have stayed at the table for 3 hours. A pause. That would be the move of someone who genuinely didn't know they'd been abandoned. The word landed. She didn't flinch, but it cost her something, the not flinching. So what happens now, she said. Now, Roman said, your phone is not safe. You are not safe. The file on your phone represents leverage against my organization and access to accounts that 6 separate criminal enterprises in this city would pay significant amounts to obtain. He said it in the flat, practical tone of someone reading a weather report. Any one of those organizations has already been notified that Ethan Cross walked with the database. They will determine within hours, if they haven't already, that he left it somewhere. They will trace the app. They will find your profile. They will find your name. He paused. They will come for the phone. Delilah was quiet for a long moment. I'm a financial analyst, she said finally. From Bucktown. I have a cat and a standing order at the coffee shop on the corner, and I file estimated quarterly taxes because I do some freelance work on the side. I am not a person who belongs in whatever you're describing. I know that. Then you should just what? His tone didn't sharpen. It didn't need to. Go home? Go home to the address in your name, at the phone number attached to your profile, to the apartment that anyone with 15 minutes and a basic data subscription can locate? He let the silence do the work. Ms. Mercer, in approximately 6 hours, maybe less, people who are not me and who have no interest in whether you knew about the file will know where you sleep. She looked at him. He looked back. What are you suggesting? She said. I'm not suggesting anything. He stood, buttoning his coat with the unhurried precision of a man who had made difficult decisions so many times the machinery of it ran on its own. I'm telling you that you have 2 options. You go home, or you come with me. To where? Somewhere safe. Safe, she repeated. You're Roman Vescari, and you're offering to take me somewhere safe. Something crossed his face. It wasn't humor exactly. It was the ghost of what humor looked like on a man who'd mostly forgotten how it worked. The irony is not lost on me, he said. Why would you protect me? She said. I'm not your problem. The file on your phone belongs to me. That makes you my problem. He looked down at her. And I protect what's mine. He moved away from the table toward the exit, and 2 of his men, like shadows, reorganized themselves around him. Delilah sat for a moment in the empty chair of the most expensive restaurant in Chicago, in her green dress, with her phone in her hand and 847 megabytes of something lethal sitting in her downloads folder. And she thought about the lies she had told herself when she came in, that this night was going to be fine. She stood up. She followed him. Outside, the cold off Lake Michigan hit like a physical fact, the kind of cold that had opinions about you. Two black SUVs sat at the curb with their engines running. Roman was already moving toward the first one. One of his men held the rear door open and said nothing, his breath fogging in the dark. Delilah stopped on the sidewalk. "I need to know something," she said. Roman turned, just slightly, just enough. "Ethan Cross." She kept her voice steady. "You said he stole from you. You said he disappeared." She looked at him. "What happens to him when you find him?" Roman Vescari looked at her for a long time in the dark and the cold, the city noise washing around them, and his face said everything his voice didn't. "Get in the car, Miss Mercer." She got in the car. The doors closed. The SUV moved into traffic. Chicago folded itself around them, the skyline throwing gold light across the wet pavement, the lake somewhere behind them enormous and black and indifferent. Delilah held her phone in both hands and looked out the window and did not think about the green dress or the empty chair or the 3 hours she had spent being lied to. She thought about the file. She thought about 847 megabytes. She thought about the way Ethan had said it. "I already picked a couple things I think you'll love." She thought about what kind of man builds a lie that careful. What kind of man picks a woman that specifically? What kind of man looks at a person and sees not who she is, but what she can be made to carry? Beside her, Roman Vescari sat in silence and looked straight ahead and said nothing. And the car moved north along Lakeshore Drive with the water black and still on their right and the city burning on their left. And Delilah thought, somewhere in this city, Ethan Cross is watching his phone and waiting to hear that Roman's people found a woman in a green dress sitting at table 14. He was waiting to hear that the dead drop worked. He did not yet know that the woman had gotten in the car. He did not yet know what she was capable of, and neither, for that matter, did she. The SUV turned off Lakeshore Drive and climbed toward the high floors of the city, toward glass and altitude and a view of Chicago that looked like something you would earn only after you had survived something enormous. And Delilah Mercer pressed her back against the seat and breathed slowly through her nose and did not let herself feel anything yet, because the night was not finished, and she had always worked better when she could see the whole picture. She hadn't seen the whole picture yet, but she was starting to understand the shape of it, and the shape of it was going to require everything she had. The penthouse was on the 43rd floor of a building that didn't have its name on the outside, which Delilah understood immediately was intentional. Buildings that wanted to be found put their names on the outside. This building didn't want to be found. It simply wanted to exist at an altitude that made everything below it look manageable. The elevator required a key card and a 4-digit code, and one of Roman's men, the one with the flat nose and the gray jacket, who hadn't said a single word since Aurelius, stood between her and the panel the entire ride up, which she understood was not an accident. She was not supposed to see the code. She filed that away the way she filed everything, quietly, in the part of her mind that ran underneath the part that was currently trying to process the fact that she was riding an elevator with armed men at 11:15 on a Friday night instead of driving home on the I-90. The doors opened directly into the penthouse. It was not what she expected, and she had expected something. She had expected the visual vocabulary of organized crime the way movies had taught it to her. Dark leather, exposed brick, weapons visible in the specific decorative way that announced power. What she got instead was something that looked like it had been designed by someone who read architectural journals and had very strong opinions about negative space. Clean lines, pale stone floors, a wall of windows facing the lake that was so large it didn't feel like a window. It felt like the building had simply forgotten to have a wall on that side. Chicago spread itself below like something that had been laid out for her inspection. "There's a room at the end of the hall," Roman said, already moving toward a table where a man was waiting with a laptop and what looked like a signal analyzer. "You'll stay there." "I'll stay there," she repeated. "You have a problem with that." "I have several problems." She stood in the middle of his living room in her green dress with her purse over her shoulder and her phone still in her hand, and she looked at him squarely. "But I'll start with the one that's most immediate, which is that I haven't agreed to stay anywhere. I got in your car because the alternative you described was alarming. I haven't signed anything." Roman stopped, turned, looked at her with an expression that suggested he was not accustomed to this particular kind of friction. "You want to negotiate. I want to understand what I'm agreeing to. You're agreeing to be alive tomorrow morning." "That's not an agreement," she said. "That's a threat dressed up as hospitality." The man at the laptop looked up briefly and then found something very interesting to look at on his screen. Roman crossed his arms. It was a small gesture, and it was the first time she had seen him do something that looked remotely like impatience. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," Delilah said, starting with the file. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out a chair from the table and sat, not across from her but at an angle, the way you sit when you're deciding how much of the truth is necessary. "Sit down." She sat. The man at the laptop, Roman called him Drez without introduction, and Drez had the compact, watchful look of someone who had been hired specifically for the quality of his attention, had already pulled up a forensic file analysis on the download. He turned the laptop toward Roman, who looked at it and then looked at Delilah. "The file is encrypted with a custom cipher," Roman said. "Not commercial, something Ethan built himself or had built. It's going to take time to crack." "How much time?" "Drez." Drez didn't look up. 6 hours minimum. Maybe 12 if he layered it. "So the file is on my phone and nobody can read it yet," Delilah said. "Correct. But the people who want it don't know that." Roman looked at her again with that recalibrating expression, the one she was starting to recognize as the face he made when she said something that landed in a place he hadn't expected. "No," he said, "they don't. So right now I'm valuable because they think I have access to the file, not because I actually do." "Functionally, yes. And once the file is decrypted, then the content is what's valuable, not the carrier." She let that sit for a moment. The word carrier hung in the air between them with all of its implications intact. "I want my own copy," she said. "Once it's decrypted, I want to see what was on it." "Absolutely not." "Then we have a problem." "Ms. Mercer." "He used me," she said. Her voice didn't rise. It went in the opposite direction, flattened out to something that was almost conversational, which was how she knew she was genuinely angry. The stillness of it, the way it settled into her chest like ballast. "He built a profile. He spent 3 weeks cultivating something that felt like a connection, and he was doing it because he needed a place to hide something, and he looked at me and saw a woman that nobody would look at twice." She held Roman's gaze. "I want to know what I was carrying. I want to know what my humiliation was worth to him in dollars." The room was quiet. Drez was absolutely not looking at either of them. Roman sat with his hands folded and looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read, which was unusual. She could usually read people. "I'll consider it," he said. "That's not... It's what you're getting tonight." He stood. "The room is at the end of the hall. There's clothing in the closet. Don't ask why. I keep guest items. It's practical. Your phone stays with Drez until the encryption is broken." She stood too. "My phone stays here." He was already moving. "The file is on it. The file is what's keeping you breathing and what's putting you in danger simultaneously. Until we know what's in it, it doesn't leave this floor." She wanted to argue. She looked at Drez, who had the careful stillness of a man trying to be furniture, and at her phone, and at the wall of windows with Chicago burning 43 floors below, and she understood with the same part of her brain that read spreadsheets that the argument she wanted to have would cost her more than she was willing to spend tonight. She set the phone on the table. "I want it back by morning," she said. Roman didn't answer. He walked toward the far side of the penthouse and disappeared through a door, and one of the other men, not Drez, a different one, taller, with a scar through his left eyebrow, materialized from somewhere and said quietly, "I'll show you the room." She didn't sleep. She lay on a bed that cost more than her monthly rent, and looked at a ceiling that was pure white and smooth and gave her nothing to focus on, and she listened to the sounds of the penthouse, which were very few and very deliberate. Footsteps once, measured and heavy. A door. The low murmur of voices that didn't carry words, just the shape of urgency. At some point she heard what she was fairly certain was someone on a phone speaking in a language she didn't recognize, fast and clipped, and then silence. She thought about Ethan Cross. She thought about the specific texture of his lying, how calibrated it had been. The compliments that were precise enough to feel observed rather than generic. He hadn't told her she was beautiful in the broad, unspecific way men said it when they wanted something. He had said she had a particular quality of stillness, that watching her think was like watching someone do math they were good at. That it was one of the most attractive things he'd encountered in years. And she had felt it, the warmth of that, the specific pleasure of being seen by someone who seemed to have the vocabulary for what he was looking at. She had been so hungry for it. That was the thing she kept returning to, the thing that sat in her chest like a stone with edges. She had been so careful about almost everything else in her life. She read fine print. She ran projections. She had caught 3 separate accounting irregularities at Callaway and Briggs in the past 2 years that had saved the firm from exposure they hadn't even known they were facing. She was not a credulous person, but she had been so hungry to be chosen by someone who saw her clearly that she had missed the fact that being seen clearly was exactly what made her useful to him. She got up at 4 in the morning and walked to the window. Chicago did what Chicago did at 4 in the morning, which was breathe slowly under its own light. The lake a dark mass beyond the glitter of Lakeshore Drive, the grid of the city going all the way to the horizon like a circuit board. She stood there in borrowed clothes, dark sweats and a soft gray shirt that smelled like cedar and something more personal, which she noted and did not think too carefully about, and looked out at it and tried to build the architecture of the next 24 hours the way she built financial projections. What was known, what was estimated, what were the risk variables? Known. The file was on her phone and was encrypted and was worth something enormous to multiple parties. Known, she could not go home. Known, Roman Vescari had reasons to keep her safe that were self-interested, which was actually more reliable than altruism because self-interest was consistent and altruism was conditional. Estimated the decryption would take until morning, maybe afternoon. Risk variables, everything else. You should sleep. She turned. Roman was standing in the doorway of the room. He wasn't wearing the coat or the suit jacket. Dark trousers, a dark shirt with the collar open, sleeves pushed to the elbows. The cut on his jaw had been cleaned and was starting to close. He looked for the first time like a person who occupied a body, rather than a man who happened to be using one to conduct business. I'm not tired, she said. You've been awake for... He glanced at something past her shoulder, probably the skyline, the angle of it. 20 hours, minimum. You're tired. I'm also stranded in a stranger's penthouse because a man I went on one date with turned my phone into a weapon, she said. Sleep is not happening. He came to stand beside her at the window. Not close. The right distance. The distance of 2 people who did not yet know each other standing in the same general direction. How long have you been with Callaway and Briggs? He said. She looked at him sideways. You know where I work. I know a lot of things about you. I'm asking because I want to hear you say it. 6 years. You like it. I like the work. I tolerate the institution. She looked back at the city. Why? You caught something in his profile, he said. The file size, you noticed it immediately. I read numbers for a living. 847 megabytes is not a PDF. Most people wouldn't have caught it. Most people don't pay attention to file sizes. Most people don't pay attention to a lot of things. He was looking at her rather than the window. She could feel it the way you feel a change in light. Ethan picked you because he thought you were invisible. He miscalculated. She turned to look at him directly. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, he said simply. It's just true. The honesty of it, the unvarnished flatness of it, did something unexpected to her chest. She turned back to the window. He told me I was intimidating, she said. I thought he meant it as a compliment. What did he mean? I don't know yet. I'll find out when you find him. Roman was quiet for a moment. You want to be there? I want to be there, she confirmed. He made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite refusal. Then he said, Get some sleep, Ms. Mercer, and walked back toward the door. Delilah? She said. He stopped. Ms. Mercer is what I get called when someone is about to tell me something I don't want to hear. My name is Delilah. A pause. Long enough to mean something. Get some sleep, Delilah. He left. She stood at the window for another 20 minutes and then went back to bed and lay down and this time, eventually, slept. She woke to voices, not calm voices. The kind of voices that happen when something has gone wrong, and the people who are responsible for nothing going wrong are processing the information that something has gone wrong. She was awake and upright before she had fully identified the sound, which was the kind of response that her body had apparently developed overnight in response to the circumstances. She opened the bedroom door. The main room of the penthouse had 3 men in it she hadn't seen before, all of them with the particular quality of recent movement. Coats still on, cold still coming off them, the look of people who had walked in 60 seconds ago with information. Dres was at the table with her phone and 2 laptops open. Roman stood in the center of the room with his arms at his sides and the specific stillness of a man absorbing very bad news and deciding how to respond to it. He turned when she came in. Go back to the... What happened? This doesn't concern... What happened? She walked into the room. Nobody stopped her. She wasn't sure if that was because Roman hadn't given the signal or because she moved like she belonged there. Is it the file? Has someone... Korvac's people hit a warehouse on the south side 40 minutes ago, said the man closest to the door. He was talking to Roman, not her, but he didn't lower his voice. 3 of ours in the hospital. They left a message. What kind of message? Roman said. The man held up his phone. She was close enough to see the screen. It was a photograph of a piece of paper with 4 words written on it in black marker. Give us the girl. The room was very quiet. They know she's here, Roman said. They knew within 6 hours, Dres said, not looking up from the laptop, which means Ethan told them. Ethan is working with Korvac, Roman said. It wasn't a question. Looks like it. Roman turned, walked 3 steps to the window, stood with his back to the room for a moment that felt longer than it was. When he turned back, his face had the closed, particular quality of a decision already made. Double the perimeter, he said to the man by the door. Nobody in or out without direct authorization. Move the cars. He looked at Dres. How long on the file? 4 hours? Maybe 3 if I... 3, Roman said. I need it in 3. Dres nodded and turned back to the screens. Delilah stood in the middle of all of it and looked at the photograph of the 4 words on that man's phone and felt something happen to her understanding of her situation. She had thought, she had been operating on the assumption that she was a problem to be managed, a complication to be resolved, a woman who had been in the wrong place with the wrong file on her phone and who would be returned to her life once the file was dealt with. Give us the girl. She was not a complication to Korvac's people. She was the objective. They're not coming for the file, she said. Roman looked at her. They know the file is encrypted. Ethan told them that too, probably. They're coming for me because they think I can open it. They think I have access. She looked at him steadily, the logic of it assembling itself in real time the way it did when she was working a bad set of numbers, and the shape of the problem finally revealed itself. Ethan told them I was a financial analyst. He probably told them I had forensic accounting skills. They think I can decrypt his cipher. Can you? Roman said. No. I have no idea how he built it, but they don't know that. So as far as Korvac is concerned, Roman said slowly, you're not a carrier. You're the key. Yes. She met his eyes, which means the file decrypting doesn't end my problem. It might make it worse. Because once your people crack it, Korvac has no way of knowing that happened. He'll keep coming. Roman looked at her for a long moment. You think fast, he said. I've been thinking fast since 11 o'clock last night, she said. I'm exhausted, but I'm right. He moved toward the table and pulled out the chair across from Dres and sat, and she watched him think. Actually watched the machinery of it, the way his eyes went to the middle distance and his hands went flat on the table. He looked up at Dres. Can you make it look like the decryption failed? Dres blinked. I want Korvac to believe the file is still locked, still needs her. He glanced at Delilah. Can you do that? Dres turned back to his screen. I can make a ghost file. Put a fake failed decryption log on the network. If Korvac has a mole watching our systems, he does. Then yes, I can make it look like the file is still inaccessible. Give us maybe 48 hours before they figure out it's staged. Do it. Roman. The man by the door, whose name she still didn't know. If we fake the decryption and Korvac finds out, we lose the leverage entirely. We'd be better off cracking it fast and moving on her on our terms. Moving on her, Delilah said flatly. The man by the door looked at her for the first time since she'd walked into the room. It was not a warm look. It was the look of a man recalibrating whether her presence in this conversation was appropriate. I meant operationally, he said. You meant using me as bait. A beat. Victor, Roman said. She's not bait. She's under my protection. He said the second sentence with a quietness that carried considerable weight. Victor looked at him, and something passed between them that she couldn't fully read, some history or hierarchy that settled the matter without requiring more words. Victor looked back at his phone, said nothing. Delilah looked at Roman. He was already looking at her. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he said. It's still the right tactical move. He pushed back from the table. I need to make calls. Stay in the penthouse. Don't go near the windows. He started moving toward the back of the apartment. Roman. He stopped. It was the first time she'd used his name without the formality, and they both registered it. Ethan called me last night, she said. Before all of this. My phone was with Drez, but she stopped. Thought. He's tried to reach me. If he doesn't hear back, he'll know something's wrong. He'll know I'm with you. Roman turned around fully. When did he call? I don't know the exact time. Sometime after I fell asleep. Maybe 2, 3 in the morning. I didn't hear it. Roman looked at Drez. Check her call log. Drez was already on it. 2:47 a.m. Unknown number, routed through 3 VPN relays, lasted 0 seconds, went to voicemail. He left a voicemail, Delilah said. Drez found it. Put it on speaker. The voice was immediately recognizable and immediately wrong. Too careful, the warmth calibrated at the wrong register. The smoothness of it strained in the way smooth things got strained when they were covering something fraying underneath. Hey, it's me. I know tonight was terrible and I'm so sorry. Something came up that I can't explain right now, but I need you to trust me. Call me back on this number. Don't tell anyone. Please. A pause, and then something shifted in the voice, a crack in the performance, something uglier and more real underneath. Just call me back, Delilah. I need to know the phone is still with you. The recording ended. The room sat with it. I need to know the phone is still with you. Not, I'm sorry. Not, are you okay? Not, I need to explain myself. I need to know the phone is still with you. She had known already that she'd been used. She had understood it intellectually from the moment Roman had laid it out at table 14. But there was a difference between understanding something intellectually and hearing it, hearing the thing the person said when they stopped performing and let you see what they actually needed from you. She had been an instrument. She had been a storage device. She had been selected because someone looked at her and calculated that she was a woman that nobody would suspect, that nobody would look at, that nobody would come running for if she disappeared. She felt the cold of it settle into her bones. And underneath the cold, something else. Something that wasn't grief and wasn't fear and was considerably more dangerous than either. Call him back, she said. Everyone in the room looked at her. I'll call him back, she said again. I'll tell him I have the phone. I'll tell him I'm home, that nothing happened, that I'm worried about him. She looked at Drez. You can trace the VPN chain once the call connects, right? You can run it back to a location while he's on the line. Drez looked at Roman. Roman looked at Delilah. He'll know something's wrong the second you open your mouth, Victor said from the door. You're not trained for... He spent 3 weeks convincing me he cared about me, she said, and her voice had gone very quiet and very flat, and she was done with the particular patience she had been performing since last night. I know exactly how he sounds when he's performing sincerity, because he performed it at me for 21 days. I can do the same. She looked at Victor. I'm very good at sitting still and looking uncomplicated. Ask anyone. Victor said nothing. She looked back at Roman. Roman's expression had shifted again, that recalibration she was learning to read, the small adjustment behind the eyes when she said something that rearranged his estimate of her. If he hears anything off, Roman said carefully, he'll cut the line. We might only get 30 seconds of trace time. Then I won't give him anything off, she said. Delilah, he picked me, she said, because he thought I was someone who would wait quietly and not understand what was happening to her. She held Roman's eyes. I want him to find out what he actually picked. The silence in the room lasted long enough for the city outside the windows to register. The muted percussion of Chicago at dawn, the world going about its business 43 floors below. Roman nodded once. Drez handed her the phone. She looked at the screen, at the unknown number in the call log, at the timestamp, 2:47 a.m. She thought about the green dress hanging in a restaurant coat room somewhere. She thought about table 14 and the crystal chandeliers and the 3 hours she had sat there building excuses for a man who had been watching from somewhere, probably, making sure his dead drop was in place. She pressed call. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, Ethan Cross picked up, and when he said Delilah, in that warm, familiar, carefully constructed voice, Delilah? In that warm, familiar, carefully constructed voice, she said, "Hey, I've been worried sick about you." She heard him exhale. It was a real exhale, the sound of genuine relief, which told her immediately that he had spent the last several hours in actual fear, not performed fear, which meant some part of his plan had gone sideways enough to scare him. She filed that away and kept her voice exactly where it needed to be. Soft, slightly wounded, the sound of a woman who had been waiting by her phone. Across the table, Drez had both hands moving across two keyboards simultaneously. Roman stood 3 feet away with his arms crossed and his eyes on her face, reading her the way she was reading the voice on the phone. "I'm so sorry about tonight," Ethan said. "I know how it must have looked." "It looked like you didn't show up," she said. She let a little of the real hurt into it, which wasn't hard because the real hurt was right there, sitting just beneath the surface of everything. "I sat there for 3 hours, Ethan. I know, and I'm so sorry. Something happened that I can't explain over the phone, but I need you to know it wasn't," a pause, the calibrated kind, "it wasn't about you. I need you to know that." Dries held up 4 fingers, 4 minutes to complete the trace. "Where are you?" she said. "I can't tell you that right now. I just need to know you're okay. Are you home?" "I'm home," she said. "I took a cab. I was pretty upset." "Of course you were." The warmth in his voice was extraordinary, she thought. The precision of it, like a frequency calibrated specifically to whatever the listener needed to hear. "Do you still have your phone, the same one?" There it was. "Yes," she said. "Why?" "No reason. I tried calling and it went to voicemail and I panicked a little." A small, self-deprecating laugh that she recognized from their second phone call, the same laugh, the same cadence. He had a library of these. "I feel terrible about tonight. I want to explain everything. Can I come see you?" Drez held up 2 fingers. "When?" she said. "Soon. Tomorrow, maybe. I just need to take care of something first." His voice dropped slightly, became more intimate in the specific way it got when he was about to say something he wanted her to receive as significant. "Delilah, the file I sent you, the menu. Do you still have it?" She looked at Roman. Roman gave her nothing, just looked back. "I think so," she said. "I never opened it. It's probably still in my downloads somewhere." "Good." The word came out too fast, too unguarded, and she heard him hear it and recalibrate. "Good. I want to... There's some information in there I need back. It's personal. Just don't open it, okay? Don't show it to anyone. I'll explain when I see you." Drez held up 1 finger. She looked at the table, at her own hands, at the grain of the pale stone surface. She thought about 3 hours at table 14. She thought about 847 megabytes disguised as a menu. She thought about, "I need to know the phone is still with you." Drez pointed at her and made a circle in the air. "Done." "Ethan," she said. "Yeah." "I know what the file is." Silence. Not the silence of someone thinking, the silence of someone going very still. "What did you—" "I know it's not a menu. I know what you put on my phone. I know why you set up the date." She kept her voice even. It required every piece of discipline she had. "I know about Roman Viscari." The silence on the other end lasted 4 full seconds. When Ethan spoke again, the warmth was gone. Completely. Utterly. Like a light switched off, and what was left behind the switch was something she had never heard in his voice because she had never been necessary to him in any way other than useful. "Where are you?" he said. "I told you. Home." "You're lying." His voice was flat now, functional. "You're with him." I don't. The word was sharp and small, and it cut. Don't perform for me. I built the performance. I know what it sounds like. A pause. How much have you told him? She said nothing. Delilah. Her name in his mouth now had a different quality entirely. Stripped of affection, reduced to the pure utility of a word used to direct someone's attention. Think very carefully about what you're doing. You don't know what Roman Viscari is. You think he's protecting you. He's not protecting you. He's protecting the file. I know that, she said. Then you know that the second he has what he needs from you, you're a liability. He says a lot of things. His voice was quick now, urgent in the way of someone who has identified the specific lever to apply pressure to. I've worked for him for 4 years. I've watched what happens to people who think they have his protection. It's not protection. It's a leash. A breath. I got out. I got out because I knew what was coming, and I have enough now to disappear completely and never look back. And I can take you with me. I will take you with me. We can still... Stop, she said. He stopped. I want you to say one true thing to me, she said. Just one. Not a strategy, not a play. One true thing. A long pause. The file, he said finally. Is it still on your phone? She hung up. She set the phone on the table and sat with her hands flat on the stone surface and breathed slowly through her nose and did not look at anyone in the room for approximately 10 seconds. Then she looked at Drez. Did you get it? Drez was already typing. Got the relay chain, peeling it back now. His hands moved. South side, near the old Meridian freight depot. More keystrokes. Building went commercial vacancy about 2 years ago. 3 floors, no registered tenants. Roman was already moving toward Victor. Get Salvo and the crew. South side, Meridian freight. Roman. Victor's voice carried something careful in it. Now, Victor. There's a problem. Victor hadn't moved from the door. He had his phone in his hand, and his face had the quality of someone holding something hot and deciding how to set it down without burning themselves. I just got word from Marcos. Marcos is watching the Korvac perimeter. Was watching, Victor said. He called in 20 minutes ago. Korvac moved, not toward us. He paused. Toward the freight depot. The room went quiet in the specific way rooms went quiet when everyone in them simultaneously understood that the situation had just changed shape. Roman stopped moving. Korvac knows where Ethan is, Delilah said. It appears so, Roman said. Ethan doesn't know that. No. She looked at the phone on the table, at the call log, at 2:47 a.m., at the unknown number and the 3 VPN relays and the voice that had said, I need to know the phone is still with you. Ethan was never running from you and Korvac simultaneously, she said slowly. The shape of it was coming together the way numbers came together when you finally found the right formula. He was running from you with Korvac. He made a deal. He gave Korvac access to the database in exchange for, what, money? Passage? Both, probably, Roman said. His voice had a new quality. She couldn't name it exactly. Colder than cold. The file was never meant to be a bargaining chip between Ethan and Korvac. It was supposed to be the copy. He extracted 2 copies. One stays with Korvac. One he sends to a dead drop. You, as insurance. Insurance against Korvac, she said. If Korvac decided to take the database and eliminate the source, Ethan still had leverage. He still had the only person who could theoretically access the second copy. Roman looked at her steadily. You were never just a dead drop. You were his guarantee that Korvac couldn't just kill him and walk away with everything. She sat with that. She was the insurance policy. She was the piece that kept Ethan Cross alive, which meant the moment Korvac found Ethan without resolving the question of the second file, the moment that guarantee evaporated. He's already dead, she said. Roman looked at her. Or he will be, she said. The moment Korvac gets to that depot and decides he doesn't need Ethan anymore. She looked at Roman. Which means the second copy of the file, the one on my phone, becomes the only copy that exists, and Korvac will need it, which means he'll need you, Roman said, with considerably more urgency than before. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then Roman said, Get Salvo, again. And this time Victor moved. What happened at the Meridian Freight Depot, she learned in pieces over the next 4 hours. She learned it from the quality of Roman's voice when he took calls, from the way Drez's typing changed rhythm when new information came in, from Victor's face when he came back at 7:40 in the morning with dried blood on the sleeve of his coat that she chose not to ask about. Korvac's people had reached the depot first. Ethan Cross had been found on the second floor. He was alive. He would remain alive, she gathered, for exactly as long as he was useful to Korvac, which was exactly as long as the question of the second file remained unresolved. Roman's crew had pulled back. No engagement. Not yet. The calculation was simple and brutal. Going in now meant a firefight over a man that Roman wanted dead anyway, in a building controlled by Korvac's people, with no clear exit. The math didn't work. So they waited. Delilah sat at the table in the penthouse and drank the coffee that appeared at her elbow. She didn't see who put it there, and watched Drez work the decryption and tried to build the shape of the next 12 hours in her head. The file. Korvac. Ethan as a hostage. Roman's paralysis, which wasn't really paralysis but was the deliberate stillness of a man choosing his moment. And somewhere inside all of that, a phone call she had made where she had said, "I know what the file is," and burned the one asset she'd had, which was Ethan's belief that she was still on the outside of this. She had done it because it felt like the right thing to do. She was starting to wonder if it was the strategic thing to do. At 8:15, Drez said, "I'm through." The room reorganized itself around those 3 words. Roman came in from wherever he'd been. Victor appeared. 2 other men she'd started to recognize by posture rather than name moved toward the table. "Give me the structure," Roman said. Drez pulled up the file on the main screen, a large monitor mounted to the wall that she hadn't registered as connected to anything until now. The decrypted database was enormous. Hundreds of folders, sub-accounts, routing numbers, shell company registrations across 7 countries, names she didn't recognize and names she did, which was jarring. In the way it was always jarring when 2 separate categories of reality turned out to be the same category. She was looking at it before Roman said she could. She couldn't help it. Numbers were her language, and this was a sentence she had been trying to read for 18 hours. "There," she said. Roman looked at her. She pointed at the screen. "That account cluster. The routing structure." She stopped herself, looked at Drez. "Can you pull the transaction history on those 3 accounts in the second subfolder, the ones with the Cayman registration?" Drez looked at Roman. Roman nodded. Drez pulled it. She looked at the numbers. She looked at the dates. She looked at the patterns of movement, the amounts, the intervals between transactions. Her brain did what her brain did when it had real data, which was to move very fast and very quietly through the implications of what it was seeing. "These accounts have been moving money for 14 months, she said, "but the amounts don't match the outflows in the main ledger. There's a discrepancy." She pointed. "Here, and here. The delta is—" She did the math in her head, which took approximately 4 seconds. Approximately $2.3 million, distributed across 18 months, an amount small enough to avoid automatic flagging. The room was very quiet. "Ethan wasn't stealing from you 48 hours ago," she said. "He's been stealing from you for a year and a half." She turned from the screen. Roman's face was still. She had thought she understood his stillness by now, but this was a different quality of it. This was the stillness of a man who has discovered that the thing he thought was a sudden betrayal was actually a long, patient, ongoing one, and who is processing the difference between those 2 things. "He would have needed access," Roman said. His voice was very controlled. "He would have needed authorization he didn't have." "Someone gave it to him," Victor said. "Someone inside." Roman turned, not to Victor, to the window. Chicago gray and cold in the early morning light. The implication landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Everyone felt the ripple. There was a mole, had been one for 18 months. Someone inside Roman's organization had given Ethan Cross the access he needed to skim $2.3 million over a year and a half without triggering a single automatic flag. "Victor," Roman said. "Don't," Victor said. Roman turned. "Don't look at me like that," Victor said, and his voice had something new in it, something that was not quite fear and not quite defiance, but lived in the narrow space between them where men stood when they were out of good options. "I have been with you for 11 years. Someone gave him the authorization codes, Roman said. Then find out who. I'm looking at who. Victor's jaw tightened. Roman. The authorization for the Cayman cluster was issued from a terminal in this building, Drez said. He said it quietly, without looking up. Not delivering a verdict, delivering data. I can pull the terminal log. Pull it, Roman said. The silence while Drez worked was the worst kind, the kind that everyone in the room knew was about to end with something irreversible. Terminal 7, Drez said. Access issued 17 months ago. Credentials belong to... He stopped. Say it, Roman said. Drez looked up. Marcos. Victor made a sound. Roman turned to look at him, and Delilah watched something happen between them in that look. The compressed history of 11 years of whatever they had been to each other. The weight of it. The cost of what was about to be required. Marcos reports to you, Roman said. Yes. Victor's voice was stripped down now, bare. He does. Did you know? The pause lasted long enough to be its own answer. Victor, I didn't know about the Cayman accounts, Victor said. I knew he had a separate arrangement. I didn't know the scope. He met Roman's eyes. I didn't know it was that much. But you knew. Victor said nothing. You knew, Roman said again, and the quiet of it was worse than volume would have been. She watched Victor's face do something complicated and human and ultimately insufficient. She watched him try to locate the words for what he'd done and fail to find them, not because they didn't exist, but because no arrangement of words was going to make this into something survivable. Get out, Roman said. Roman, get out of this building. Take nothing. Go. He turned away. I'll decide what happens to you after I handle what's in front of me. Victor left. The door to the elevator closed. The room sat in the aftermath of it. Delilah looked at Roman's back, at the set of his shoulders against the window, the way he was standing with the city behind him, and nothing in front of him but the consequences of the last 18 months. She thought about what it cost to look at someone you had trusted for 11 years and understand that the trust had been a door left unlocked from the inside. She knew something about that. I'm sorry, she said. He turned. His face was closed. Don't be. Roman, it doesn't help, he said. Not unkind, just precise. He looked at her. Marcos is with Korvac's people at the depot. It took her a moment, then it landed. He told them where Ethan was, she said. Marcos told Korvac. He's been feeding Korvac information for at least as long as he's been feeding Ethan access codes. Roman looked at the monitor, at the open database, at the architecture of 18 months of patient betrayal laid out in numbers on a screen. Which means Korvac knows more about my operation than I thought. Routes. Schedules. He paused. Safe houses. This penthouse. She watched him reach the same conclusion she was reaching, watched it move across his face the way a shadow moved. How long before he moves on this location, she said. Roman looked at Drez. Drez was already on it. His hands moved across the keyboard and then stopped. He looked up, and the quality of the look was the one she had learned to read in the last 18 hours as the one that preceded very bad news. There's a vehicle, Drez said, that's been parked on the street below for the last 40 minutes. Black sedan. No plates. Roman moved to the window, stayed to the side of it, not in front of it, which she understood instinctively. One vehicle, he said. That I can see, Drez said. Building cams are showing clear, but building cams are on an external server that Marcos would have had access to. So we can't trust the cameras. No. Roman turned from the window. He looked at Delilah. She looked back at him. Between them was the decrypted database on the monitor, the only complete copy of everything Ethan Cross had stolen, and downstairs was a black sedan with no plates. And somewhere on the south side, Ethan Cross was in Korvac's hands, and Marcos was feeding their location to people who wanted the file and had already put 3 men in the hospital to say so. We need to move, Roman said. To where? She said. Somewhere Marcos doesn't know about. He moved toward the back of the penthouse. There's one location, one that was never in any system he could access. He glanced back at her. Get the phone. Get the file. She grabbed the phone from the table, looked at the monitor, at the database still open on screen. Drez, already on it. Dres was copying the decrypted file to an encrypted drive the size of her thumb. He ejected it and held it out to her. "Keep this separate from the phone. If we get split up—" "We're not getting split up," Roman said from the other room. Dres looked at her. She took the drive and put it in her pocket. And then from somewhere below them, deep in the building structure, she felt rather than heard the thing that changed everything. Not an explosion. Something more controlled than that. A concussive pressure. The kind that traveled up through the floors and arrived in your chest before your ears registered it. The elevator panel went dark. The lights in the penthouse flickered. Dres looked at his screens and then said, very quietly, one word that told her everything about how much time they had left. Stairwell. She was already moving when Roman came back through the door, and the look on his face when he saw her on her feet, and moving was the first time she had seen something in him that wasn't calculation or control, and it took her a half-second to identify what it was, because she had not expected to see it on that particular face in that particular moment. It was relief. She filed that away and kept moving. The stairwell door was at the end of the hall, heavy fire-rated steel, and Roman hit it with his shoulder without breaking stride, and held it open, and she went through, and Dres was right behind her with the laptop bag across his chest, and the hard drive in his coat pocket, and the door swung shut behind them, and the stairwell was cold and concrete and smelled like dust, and the particular stillness of a space that was almost never used. "Down," Roman said. Not a question. "Lobby's compromised," Dres said. "They hit the elevator control panel, which means they're on the building grid. Security desk is probably—" "Down," Roman said again. "Not the lobby. Sub-basement. There's a service tunnel that connects to the parking structure on Wacker. It's not on any building schematic that was digitized after 2009. Marcos? Marcos has been inside my operation for 17 months, Roman said, already moving down the stairs, one hand on the rail, moving fast but controlled, the way someone moved when they'd trained for exactly this kind of exit. He's never been inside my memory. They went down. 43 floors is a long way by stairwell. By the 14th floor, her thighs were burning and her breath was coming in pulls that she could hear too clearly in the concrete echo of the shaft. By the 8th floor, she had stopped counting and was just moving, the rhythm of it, step and step and step, Roman's dark shape below her and Dres's footfalls above, and the sound of the city muffled behind 4 inches of building and completely indifferent. At the 4th floor, Roman stopped. She nearly ran into him, caught the rail. "What?" He held up one hand, fingers spread. "Stop." She stopped. Dres stopped above her. Below them, from somewhere in the lower stairwell, a sound. Soft, deliberate. The sound of someone else trying not to make sound, which was its own kind of sound once you knew how to listen for it. Roman looked up at her. In the dim emergency lighting of the stairwell, his face was angles and shadow. He held up 2 fingers. 2 people. Below them. Coming up. She looked at Dres. Dres looked at his bag and then at Roman and made a gesture with his chin toward the door on the 4th floor landing. Roman considered for approximately 1 second. Moved to the door. Tested the handle. It opened. 4th floor was commercial tenancy, empty. She had no idea what it had previously been, but the door wasn't locked from the stairwell side, and they went through and Roman eased it shut behind them with a precision that made no sound whatsoever. The 4th floor was gutted. Whatever business had been here was long gone, leaving behind drop ceiling frames without tiles, exposed conduit, and the ghost rectangles of carpet that had been pulled up and replaced with bare concrete. The windows on the north side let in the flat gray morning. There was nowhere to hide that was better than anywhere else, so Roman moved them to the wall beside the door, and they stood there and waited. She could hear her own pulse. The footsteps passed on the other side of the door. Kept going upward. 2 sets of them, moving with purpose, not pausing at the 4th floor landing, going to the penthouse. Roman gave it 30 seconds. She counted. He looked at his watch, which was an analog watch, and she registered that detail later as one of the things about him that made a specific kind of sense in retrospect. Then he opened the door again, and they went back into the stairwell and continued down. The sub-basement was below the parking level. 1 more flight, unmarked door, and Roman produced a key from somewhere inside his jacket. Physical key, old-fashioned, the kind that didn't exist in any digital system, and unlocked it, and they were through. The service tunnel was exactly what it sounded like. Low-ceilinged institutional lighting on motion sensors that flickered on ahead of them and stayed off behind, concrete walls with pipes running overhead, the smell of old water and machine oil. It was wide enough for two people abreast and stretched ahead of them in a straight line. She didn't ask how far, she just walked. Roman's phone buzzed. He looked at it without slowing. His jaw tightened. "Salvo," he said. Not to her, processing it. Then, "Korvac's moving Ethan, Southside warehouse to the waterfront." He glanced back at Drez. "He knows we cracked the file." "How?" Drez said. "Marcos," she said. Both men looked at her. "Marcos was in the building," she said. "We cracked the file at 8:15. He would have known the moment Drez broke the encryption. He told Korvac." She kept walking. "Korvac knows the file is decrypted, which means Ethan's leverage as the only person who can access it is gone. Which means Ethan's expendable," Roman said, "unless Korvac still needs him for something." "He doesn't." She thought about Ethan's voice on the phone, the warmth gone from it, the thing underneath the warmth, functional and cold. She thought about, "I built the performance. I know what it sounds like." She thought about the fact that she had pulled the phone away from her ear before she heard whatever he'd said next, and that she would not hear from him again after this morning, and that she had to decide how she felt about that before she could be useful to anyone, including herself. She decided she would feel about it later. "Where's the waterfront location?" she said. "Delilah." "Where?" Roman looked at her. They had reached the end of the tunnel, another door, and he was fitting the key into the lock, and he looked at her over his shoulder with the expression she had learned to read as him deciding how much to give her. "Meridian Freight Terminal," he said. "Old pier facility. They've been using it as a transit point for 6 months. Korvac moves Ethan there, and then what?" "Then Ethan goes into the lake," Roman said, and opened the door. The parking structure on Walker was concrete and exhaust, and the particular gray light of Chicago morning filtered through the open levels. 2 cars sat on the lowest level. Black, anonymous, the kind of cars that were purchased specifically to avoid being cars anyone would remember. Salvo was leaning against the closer one. She hadn't met Salvo before. He was built like someone who had made practical decisions about his body for purely practical reasons, broad and compact and economical, with the kind of stillness that came from experience rather than training. He looked at her and then at Roman without judgment and said only, "We have a window, 90 minutes, maybe less." "Pier access," Roman said. "Salvo's crew has the east approach." He handed Roman a phone, different from the one Roman had been using. "Marcos is in the wind. He'll go to Korvac." "Already probably there." Roman took the phone. He stood for a moment with it in his hand and looked at the concrete floor of the parking structure, and she watched him do the thing she had watched him do every time the situation changed, which was build the new architecture of it in his head before he spoke. "What's Korvac's play after Ethan?" Roman said. "He has the database. He has the routes from Marcos. He doesn't need to do anything aggressive." Salvo paused. "Except he hit the building. That's a message." "He's not done with the file," Delilah said. The men looked at her. "He hit the building because we cracked the encryption before he did," she said. "But he doesn't know what we found. The 2.3 million Ethan skimmed, Ethan would have been funneling that to himself, not to Korvac. Korvac thinks the Cayman accounts are clean. He thinks he bought a clean database." She looked at Roman. "He doesn't know about the internal discrepancies. He doesn't know that the database itself is evidence of embezzlement against his own new asset." Roman was very still. "If Korvac uses the database as is," she said, "he's building his operation on financial infrastructure that has 18 months of hidden withdrawals in it. The accounts don't balance. Any forensic accountant looking at his books will find it within 2 hours. She paused. "Ethan stole from you, yes, but he stole using accounts that Korvac has now acquired, which means Ethan has been stealing from both of you simultaneously without either of you knowing." The silence in the parking structure was complete. "He's dead either way," Drez said quietly. "Yes," Delilah said, "but Korvac doesn't know that yet." Roman looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression that she didn't try to name. "You should have been an attorney," he said. "I'm better with numbers than arguments," she said. "Take me to the pier." "No." "Romans, you have the drive." He looked at her steadily. "You have the only complete decrypted copy of that database. If something happens at the pier, Then Korvac never finds out his new financial infrastructure is rotten, she said. He builds on it. He expands. And in 6 months, some federal forensic accountant who is considerably less motivated than I am finds the same thing I found, and Korvac goes down with the ship. She held his eyes. That's not justice. That's just entropy. Delilah, he used me to cover up a theft from you, she said. He put me in a restaurant in a green dress and made me sit there for 3 hours as camouflage. And then he called me at 2 in the morning and asked if the phone was still with me. She felt the anger under all of it, clean and specific, the kind that had been burning quietly since the night before and had clarified overnight into something she could use. I want to be there. She didn't say please. She had decided sometime between the stairwell and the tunnel that she was done with the shape of asking. Roman looked at her for 5 full seconds. Then he looked at Salvo. She stays in the car until I say otherwise. Salvo looked at her. She looked back. Understood, she said. He yanked. The waterfront in November had a specific character that had nothing to do with aesthetics. It was hostile. The wind off the lake arrived without obstacles, having crossed open water for miles before it reached the pier, and it hit with a physical authority that made you understand immediately that the city's famous wind had nothing to do with the politicians and everything to do with geography. The fog was patchy, thick in the low places, thin and shifting around the height of the old freight containers that still sat in rows along the pier from operations that had ended years ago. They came in 3 cars from the east approach, running without headlights the last quarter mile, and the pier absorbed them the way old industrial spaces absorbed things, without reaction, indifferently. She sat in the second car with Drez and watched Roman's silhouette move out of the lead vehicle and become part of the dark. Salvo's crew had fanned out before she could track them, 6 men moving in the specific coordinated quiet of people who had practiced this. Drez had the laptop open across his knees, pulling the building schematics for the freight terminal. Old, pre-digital. He had photographed them from a city archive file that he had apparently accessed before they left the parking structure, which told her something about the depth of preparation that Roman maintained even in circumstances that appeared to be developing in real time. Loading dock on the south face, Drez said. Not to her, but not to her. 2 entry points below the second floor. The upper level has a single fire egress on the lakeside. That's where they'll have him, she said. Why? Lakeside, high ground. If someone comes in from the east approach, which is the obvious approach, you want sight lines. She looked at the building schematic on his screen. But the approach from the water is covered. They'll have eyes on the dock. On the dock, yes. But look at the terrain between the freight container rows and the building's south face. She pointed at the screen. The containers create a corridor that's not visible from any of the upper-level windows. If you go through the containers rather than around them, you come up on the blind side of the building, Drez said. He looked at her. She was already reaching for the door handle. He said, stay in the car, Drez said. He said until he says otherwise, she said. I'm going to go find out when that is. She got out. The cold hit her immediately, restructuring everything. She had borrowed a coat from the penthouse. Heavy, dark, not hers. And she pulled it tight and moved. The gravel of the pier was wet and uneven, and her shoes were not built for this, and she cataloged that and kept moving. The freight containers were stacked too high in most places, ancient and rusted, their corrugated surfaces beaded with condensation. They formed rows with paths between them, and she moved through the second row from the south, keeping her hand on the cold metal wall to her left, moving by feel where the shadows were deepest. She heard them before she saw them. Voices from inside the terminal building carrying through a broken section of wall she hadn't seen on the schematic. She moved toward the break, a jagged gap in the lower brick course where something had impacted it, vehicle probably, years ago, and stopped just outside it and listened. Korvac she identified by process of elimination, the voice with authority in the room. Not loud. The same quality Roman had, that compression of volume that forced everyone else to be quieter in order to hear, which was its own kind of power. Ethan's voice she recognized immediately. He sounded exhausted. He sounded like a man who had been awake for a very long time, running very fast, and had finally stopped moving and was discovering what stopping felt like. The database is yours, Ethan was saying. Everything. I told you. You told me the second copy was inaccessible, Korvac said. that she couldn't decrypt it without you. She can't. She's an analyst, not a cryptographer. The cipher is... Viscari cracked it. Silence. He has a team, Ethan said. You didn't account for a lot of things. A pause. Footsteps. You told me the woman was a nobody, that she'd sit in the restaurant, Viscari's people would find her, he'd take the phone, spend 3 days on the encryption, and by that time we'd be established in the accounts. That was the plan. She called you, Korvac said. You talked to her this morning, from a relay chain that Viscari's technician traced in 4 minutes. His voice was precise and cold. She wasn't sitting at home scared, Ethan. She was sitting in his penthouse running the trace herself. She pressed her back against the brick outside the gap. Her heart was very loud. She's nobody, Ethan said. His voice had frayed at the edges. The performance was completely gone now. What was left was something smaller and rawer. She's a woman who works at a mid-sized firm in the Loop and files quarterly taxes and has a cat. She broke your encryption layer, Korvac said. Or she helped someone break it. That's not possible. The cipher was custom. She doesn't have the... Then explain to me, Korvac said, why Viscari moved this morning. Why he got his people out of the building before mine reached the penthouse. Why he's not sitting on a cracked file wondering what to do with it. And instead he's here. Right now. A pause that she felt in her stomach. Because my man on the east approach clocked 3 vehicles 7 minutes ago. The silence inside the building had a different quality now. He's here, Ethan said. Yes. Then we finish what we need to finish, Korvac said, and we leave. Footsteps again, heavier. A second person moving. Starting with the thing that made this complicated. She heard Ethan's voice change completely, heard the last layer of the performance strip away and the thing underneath exposed, small and animal and real. Wait. She was moving before she decided to move. Through the gap in the wall, scraping her shoulder on the brick, into the terminal building, which was large and dark and smelled like rust and standing water. And she came upright, and what she saw was Ethan Cross on his knees on the concrete floor of the loading level, with his hands bound in front of him, and a man she had never seen before standing over him and across the space, near a bank of old freight machinery. A compact man in a gray coat who turned when she came through the wall with the specific unhurried attention of someone who had been expecting an interruption and had simply been waiting for its form. Korvac. She had no plan. She had a phone with a decrypted database on it and a thumb drive in her coat pocket, and she had walked through a gap in a brick wall into a building controlled by a man who had put 3 people in a hospital the night before to send a message. But she had something else. She had the fact that she was still standing between Korvac and the only thing he actually needed, and she had learned in the last 18 hours that being the person who held the thing everyone needed was not the same as being powerless. You're her, Korvac said. Not a question. She answered it anyway. I'm her, she said. He looked at her with the evaluating attention of a man accustomed to rapidly assessing what a person in front of him was worth. She held still and let him look, the way she held still when she was being underestimated. The stillness she had spent 34 years building and that Ethan Cross had tried to use against her, and that she was currently repurposing. On the floor, Ethan was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him before, something raw and complicated and possibly, under different circumstances, remorseful. She didn't look at him for long. The database, Korvac said. You have the decrypted file. I have the drive, she said. Give it to me. I'll give it to you, she said. But you need to hear something first. Korvac looked at her with a patience that had edges on it. The accounts you bought, she said. The Cayman cluster, the routing infrastructure. She kept her voice steady and factual. The voice she used in presentations. The voice that she used when she had numbers behind her and needed the person across the table to understand that the numbers did not negotiate. There are 18 months of withdrawals embedded in the transaction structure, $2.3 million, distributed to avoid automatic flagging. Whoever sold you this database has been using it as a personal account for a year and a half. Korvac's expression did not move. She glanced at Ethan. Korvac followed her glance. The moment stretched. He stole from Roman Vescari, she said, but the accounts he stole through are the accounts you just acquired, which means he stole from you too. You just didn't know it yet. The building was very quiet. The fog moved past the broken windows high on the south wall. Then from the east side of the terminal, a door came off its hinges. Roman came through it like a man who had been waiting for the right moment and had just determined that this was it. And behind him, Salvo and two others, and the space reorganized itself instantly around the new geometry of it. Korvac's man near Ethan reaching for something at his hip, Salvo already moving, and Roman crossing the floor with the specific intent of a man who had identified exactly one person in the room that he was moving toward. And Korvac, with the adaptation speed of someone who had survived as long as he had by reading rooms faster than rooms could change, looked at his man and made a single small gesture. Stop. The room stopped. Roman stopped 3 feet from Korvac. They looked at each other. She stayed exactly where she was, between all of them, with the drive in her pocket and the phone in her hand and the city invisible behind the fog outside. And she thought about what the next 60 seconds required and whether she was going to be able to give it. Then Ethan Cross looked up from the floor, directly at her, and said the last thing she expected him to say, in a voice that had nothing left in it. No performance, no warmth, no instrument tuned to any particular frequency. Just something exhausted and stripped and almost honest. I picked you because I thought no one would come for you, he said. I was wrong about everything. The word landed in the freight terminal and didn't echo. The building absorbed it the way old industrial spaces absorbed everything. Without ceremony, without judgment, into the rust and the standing water and the accumulated silence of a place that had watched a lot of things happen and remembered none of them. Delilah looked at Ethan Cross on the floor and felt something she hadn't expected to feel, which was nothing dramatic. No surge of rage, no collapse of grief, just a clean, final settling, the way a building settles after the last piece of structure is placed. Not dramatic, not loud, just the sound of something finding its permanent position. I know, she said. Then Roman moved, not toward Ethan, toward Korvac. And the conversation that happened between them in the next 40 seconds was the most compressed negotiation she had ever witnessed, conducted almost entirely without full sentences, in the specific shorthand of two men who had been aware of each other for years and were now, for the first time, occupying the same room and deciding what that meant. The database, Roman said. Is mine, Korvac said. I paid for it. You paid for stolen property. I paid for infrastructure. The origin of the infrastructure is a problem, Delilah said. Both men looked at her. She reached into her coat pocket and took out the drive and held it in her open palm between them. The drive was smaller than her thumb. It was the most valuable thing in the room, and possibly in the building, and possibly on this section of the waterfront, and she held it in her open hand like it was nothing, like it was a house key she'd found on the sidewalk. The copy on this drive is the decrypted version, she said. The copy on my phone is the same. Roman's technician has a backup on a separate server. She watched Korvac's eyes. The version you bought from Ethan is the original encrypted file, which means you have a version of this database that you currently cannot read, and which contains, when decrypted, evidence that the accounts you just acquired have been bled for $2.3 million across the last 18 months. She kept her voice level and factual. You paid for infrastructure that was already compromised before you bought it. That is your actual situation. Korvac was very still. What I'm offering, she said, is the corrected version. Clean transaction history. The accounts as they should look, without the embedded withdrawals. She paused. One copy, no backups from your side. You walk away from Chicago with a functional database, and Roman walks away with his routes and his operation, and we all pretend this week didn't happen. The silence stretched long enough that she could hear the water moving beneath the pier, the dark lake working at the foundations of the place, patient and enormous. You're negotiating for him, Korvac said. He meant Roman. I'm negotiating for a resolution, she said. There's a difference. She doesn't speak for me, Roman said. Then speak for yourself, she said, not looking at him. A beat. She felt Roman look at her profile. She kept her eyes on Korvac. The offer stands as stated, Roman said finally. You take the corrected file. You pull your people out of my city. Marcos is mine. Korvac looked at him. Marcos came to me. And he's still mine. The two men held each other's gaze for a long time. Salvo hadn't moved. Korvac's man near Ethan hadn't moved. The room was a held breath. Then Korvac looked at the drive in her hand. Clean accounts, he said. Clean accounts, she confirmed. And the other copies. The phone copy gets wiped when you leave. Roman server backup. She glanced at Roman. Gets wiped, Roman said after a moment that cost him something. Korvac reached out and took the drive from her palm. His fingers were cold. He looked at it for a moment the way men looked at things they'd paid too much for. Then he put it in his coat pocket. Marcos, he said, and it wasn't a protest, just the acknowledgement of a concession made. Marcos, Roman confirmed. Korvac looked at Ethan on the floor. He's yours too, I assume, Korvac said. He was always mine, Roman said. Korvac nodded once, looked at his man near Ethan, made a minimal gesture, and the man stepped back. Then Korvac walked toward the east door, the one Roman had come through, still hanging off one hinge, and his man fell in behind him without a word, and they went out into the fog and the pier noise, and the sound of their footsteps on gravel faded quickly and then stopped. The terminal building exhaled. Delilah lowered her hand to her side. Her palm was cold where the drive had been. She looked at Ethan. He was still on his knees. His wrists were bound with what looked like zip ties, and he had a bruise developing along his left cheekbone that had not been there during their phone call. His coat was torn at the shoulder. He looked, for the first time in the entire duration of her acquaintance with him, like something real. Not a constructed thing, not a calibrated performance, but an actual human being who had made a series of catastrophic calculations and was now sitting in the physical evidence of all of them. He looked up at her. You didn't have to give him the drive, he said. His voice was hoarse. Roman could have used it, leverage against Korvac for, I know what Roman could have done with it, she said. That's why I did it before he could. Ethan blinked. A prolonged standoff over financial leverage ends one of two ways, she said. Either someone gets patient enough to outlast the other, or someone gets impatient enough to stop being careful. Both of those outcomes involve more people getting hurt and more time during which things can go wrong. She looked at him steadily. I ended it, tonight, cleanly. For him, Ethan said. You did it for him. I did it because it was the right move, she said. The fact that it also benefits Roman is a consequence, not a motivation. She paused. I'm a financial analyst. I close positions when the math says close them. The math said close it. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. His expression had something in it she couldn't fully name. Not remorse exactly, because remorse required a level of self-accounting that she suspected he had never fully developed, but something adjacent. The recognition, maybe, of a loss he hadn't known he was going to experience. The specific loss of having dismissed something as worthless and then watched it turn out to be the most valuable thing in the room. The things I said, he started. Don't, she said, on the phone, when I thought you were... I heard what you said, she said. I don't need you to explain it. I understood it the first time. She looked at him. Not with anger, which had burned clean and was gone, and not with grief, which had no purchase left. Just looked at him the way she looked at a set of numbers that told a story she had finished reading. You picked me because you thought I was the kind of woman that no one would look for. That's not a complicated thing. I've understood it from the moment Roman sat down across from me. She paused. What I want you to understand is that you were wrong about what that meant. Delilah, you thought being overlooked meant I was less, she said. It meant I had more practice being underestimated. Those are not the same thing. She looked at him one more time. Then she looked at Roman. I'm ready to go. Roman looked at her, then at Ethan. Then he said to Salvo, take him to the car. And Salvo moved, and that was the last time she looked at Ethan Cross. What happened to Ethan Cross? After that night, she was told in one sentence by Roman 3 weeks later, standing in the kitchen of his penthouse. Repaired by then, the elevator panel replaced, no sign of what had moved through it except in the quality of the silence that certain rooms hold after difficult things. When she asked him directly, and he answered directly, which she had come to understand was the primary quality of his communication, that when he chose to speak, he did not obscure. He's gone, Roman said. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. Gone. Gone, he said, not elaborating, not performing gravity about it, just the word, flat and final. And she understood everything the word contained, and she nodded once and did not ask any further questions because she had asked the question she needed to ask and received the answer she already knew was coming, and there was nothing left in that particular thread to pull. She had expected to feel something complicated about that answer. She had prepared in the weeks between the pier and this morning a kind of internal infrastructure for the complicated feeling. She had built the scaffolding of it carefully, the way she built financial models, accounting for multiple scenarios, weighting the possibilities. What she actually felt was closer to completion than complication, like a file that had been left open finally closing, like a number that had been wrong in a column finally correcting itself. She was not sure what that said about her. She had decided she was willing to not be sure. Marcos was dealt with in a way she was not told about and did not ask about, which was a line she had drawn for herself and held with both hands. Roman had asked her, early in the second week, whether she wanted to know certain things about how certain situations were resolved. She had thought about it for a full minute, sitting at his table with the city arranged behind him through the window. And then she had said, "Not if the knowing doesn't change the outcome." He had looked at her and nodded as if she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. Victor she saw once, in the third week, outside the building on Michigan Avenue. He was walking with his hands in his pockets and a look on his face that was the face of a man who had been returned to the world in a reduced form and was learning to move through it at a different weight. He saw her. She saw him. They didn't speak. She looked at him until he looked away, and then she kept walking, and she thought about what it meant to choose a side and be wrong about which side it was. And she thought about the 11 years Roman had mentioned, and she thought about the specific grief of loyalty that has been misplaced, and then she went into the building and rode the elevator up and did not think about Victor again. What she thought about, in the weeks that followed, was the file, not the database, not the accounts or the routing structure, or the $2.3 million that had moved through shell companies to a man who no longer existed to spend it. She thought about the original file on her phone, the thing that had sat in her downloads folder for 4 days with the file name Aurelius_menu_tasting_fall.pdf. And the fact that she had never opened it because she had not been suspicious enough to open it, and she sat with that fact without flinching, which took practice but got easier. She had been trusting. She had wanted to be chosen. Those were human things, and she did not punish herself for them, which was the change she noticed most clearly in the weeks following the pier. The absence of the internal prosecution that had been her background noise for most of her adult life. The voice that ran underneath everything cataloging her failures and her liabilities, and the ways in which she was too much and not enough simultaneously. It was quieter now, not gone. She was not naive enough to think one bad week had restructured her entire psychological architecture, but quieter, like a frequency that had been turned down to a level where it no longer drowned out everything else. She still worked at Callaway and Briggs. She had called in sick for 2 days after the pier and then returned on a Wednesday morning and sat at her desk and opened her queue and worked through it with the same precision she always brought, and nobody noticed anything different about her, which she registered without rancor as simply the way of things. The world did not reshape itself around private transformations. You just carried them, and the carrying changed your center of gravity, and eventually you walked differently. And sometimes people noticed that, and mostly they didn't. Her manager, a thin, nervous man named Patterson who had been passed over for partner twice and had the specific bitterness of someone who had stopped expecting things to be fair, called her into his office on that Wednesday and told her that her Q3 analysis had been excellent and that the Hendricks account had specifically mentioned her by name in their satisfaction review. And she had thanked him and returned to her desk and looked at her screen and felt the information land in a new place. Not the place where she had once stored compliments like provisions against drought, measuring them out carefully because there were never quite enough. Just the place where true things landed. She was good at her job. She had always been good at her job. That was simply true. She gave her notice 4 weeks later. Patterson looked as though she had told him the building was sinking. "You have the Hendricks account," he said. "You have the merit proposal in progress. You can't simply—" "I'm giving 6 weeks," she said. "That's 2 weeks beyond standard. I'll complete the merit proposal and document the Hendricks methodology for whoever takes over." She looked at him. "I appreciate the opportunities I've had here." She did not particularly appreciate the opportunities she had had there. But she said it because it was kind and it cost nothing, and Patterson's bewildered face was not a face that needed more difficulty in it. She met Roman for dinner that Friday. Not Aurelius. A smaller place in the West Loop that had no chandeliers and mismatched chairs and food that tasted like someone had made it for reasons other than impressing people. He was there before she arrived, which she had learned was how he always was. Early, seated with his back to the wall in a view of the door, the old practical habit of a man who had learned that the first person in the room controls the geometry of it. She sat across from him, ordered wine, looked at him. "I gave notice," she said. "I know," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Patterson called 3 people in the financial sector to ask if they'd heard anything," Roman said. "Word moves." "Word moves," she agreed. "I'm starting independently, forensic accounting consulting. I have 2 prospective clients already." Roman said nothing. He looked at her with the expression she had learned was his version of attention. The full deployment of it, unmediated, without the social performance of nodding or making encouraging sounds. He just looked and listened and processed. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. "I want to be clear about that." "I know you're not. I'm telling you because—" She stopped, considered. "Because I'm in the habit now of telling you things, and I haven't decided yet whether to stop." The corner of his mouth moved. It was not a smile in any conventional sense, but it was the thing his face did when something landed that he hadn't braced for and found he didn't mind. "Don't stop," he said. She looked at him across the mismatched table in the small West Loop restaurant. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago did on a Friday evening in late November, burning cold and bright and relentless. The lake wind moving through the streets with its usual lack of apology. The city going on without commentary about anything that had happened or was happening or was going to happen. She thought about a woman sitting alone at table 14 in a restaurant full of crystal chandeliers, watching the door. She thought about what that woman had wanted. Not the specific want of that specific evening. Not just Ethan Cross to walk through the door. Not just the date to go well. Not just to be chosen by one man on one night. The deeper want. The one that had been there longer, that had been there so long she had stopped being able to see it clearly, the way you stopped seeing furniture you had owned for years. To be seen completely, and not found lacking. She looked at Roman Viscari across the table, at the silver at his temples and the scar on his jaw, and the hands that were scarred at the knuckles from a life that had not been careful or gentle with him any more than it had been careful or gentle with her. She looked at the way he looked back at her, that complete, unperforming attention, and she thought about the fact that this was not what she had been looking for when she put on the green dress and drove to Aurelius. And about the fact that what you were looking for and what you needed were, frequently, not the same thing, and the distance between them was where your actual life happened. 2 prospective clients, Roman said. 2, she confirmed. Anyone I know. I genuinely hope not, she said. He looked at her. The Cayman accounts are Korvac's problem, she said. I cleaned what was accessible and handed over the drive, and that's the end of my involvement with anything in that database. She held his eyes. I mean that. I know you mean it. I need to know that you know I mean it. Delilah. He said her name the way he had started saying it, without ceremony, just the word, her name, direct and unadorned. I know. She nodded. She picked up her wine glass. He picked up his. The legitimate business holdings, Roman said. The real estate portfolio. The holdings company. He said it carefully, looking at her the way he looked at something he was deciding how to carry. They need a forensic accountant, someone who knows where the bodies are buried, financially speaking, and can ensure that nothing in the legitimate structure is traceable to the other structure. He paused. It would be consulting work, compensated at market rate, independent contractor status. She looked at him for a long time. You're offering me a job. I'm telling you there's work available that matches your skill set. That's the same thing. It's a different framing. Roman. Yes. Are you asking me to work for you, or are you asking me to stay involved in your life and giving it a professional frame because you think the professional frame is less, she searched for the word, alarming. The corner of his mouth moved again. Both, he said. She sat with that. The restaurant moved around them, other tables, other people, the low percussion of a Friday evening, the smell of food and wine, and the particular warmth of an enclosed space against the cold outside. "Send me the corporate structure documentation," she said finally. "I'll look at it over the weekend and tell you whether the engagement makes sense." "And the other part," he said. She looked at him. "The staying involved part," he said. She thought about the woman at table 14, about the 3 hours, about what it had felt like to sit in an expensive dress in an expensive restaurant being assembled and reassembled by other people's absences into a shape that was determined by what she was not, by who hadn't come, by the chair that was empty rather than the woman who was in the chair. She thought about a pier in the dark and fog coming off the lake, and a man who had walked across a freight terminal toward a problem and stopped 3 feet from it and let her speak first. She thought about the drive in her palm. She thought about what it felt like to hold the most valuable thing in the room and know it. "The other part isn't a business decision," she said. "No," he agreed. "So it doesn't get decided the same way." "How does it get decided?" She looked at him, at the directness of him, the absence of performance, the specific texture of a man who had spent so long in a world where everything was strategy that genuine directness had become its own kind of luxury, available only when everything else was stripped away. "Slowly," she said. "It gets decided slowly. By accumulation." She held his eyes. "By the things that happen and how we handle them. By what you do when it's difficult and what I do when it's difficult, and whether what we each do is something the other one can respect." She paused. "That's how I make decisions about things that matter." Roman looked at her. "That's reasonable," he said. "I know it's reasonable," she said. "I'm a very reasonable person." He did smile then. Fully, briefly, the real version of it, unpracticed and a little unguarded, and she saw in it the shape of who he had been before whatever had constructed the rest of him, some earlier version that had not yet learned to be this contained, and she thought, "There he is." She smiled back. Outside, Chicago went on in the dark. The lake enormous and indifferent on the east, the grid of the city burning in all directions, the wind finding the gaps between the buildings and moving through them with its customary authority. Somewhere on the 43rd floor of a building with no name on the outside, a wall of windows looked out over all of it. Somewhere in the south side, the Meridian freight terminal sat empty and cold on its pier, the fog moving through the broken windows, the water beneath it working at the foundations with the patience of something that would still be there long after the building was gone. And somewhere in the city, in an apartment in Bucktown that she would pack up at the end of the month, a green dress hung in a closet that she had worn once, to a dinner that had not gone the way she expected, at a table for 2 where the second chair had been empty until it wasn't. She had worn the green dress because she had told herself she deserved to. She had been right about that. She had been right about that from the beginning. She just hadn't known yet what deserving it was going to require her to become. She knew now. She picked up her wine glass and Roman picked up his, and they didn't make a toast, didn't say anything at all, just drank. And the evening continued around them and the city burned outside, and Delilah Mercer sat in her own skin in a small restaurant in the West Loop and took up exactly the space she occupied and did not apologize for any of it. Not 1 inch. Not anymore.